What's up, gamers, and welcome to my Shack of Secrets. We're still working on the name. Sit down and play. Here we have to draw cards to compare games. I have to play an indie strategy game plus puzzle game, which is great as I already have something in mind. What about you? I kind of feel bad about reading this in my favor now.
Inscription is an indie card game created by Daniel Mullins, who has a history for his games not being exactly what they appear to be on the surface. So, right off the bat, I have to give a huge spoiler warning as the game is amazing if you go in completely blind, and I'm going to be talking about a lot of the major elements. Released on October 19th, 2021, the game appears to be just a normal card game at first, which initially turned me off from the game as I don't tend to like that genre of games, but it's what's hidden beneath the game that makes it so enjoyable, being closer to an escape room mixed with an RPG. From the get-go, the game is pretty weird as you hear a strange voice and for some reason can't select a new game, so you're forced to hit continue instead, and I mean, it's probably fine.
Same thing they said about the bubonic plague. Look where that got them.
I mean, it could be worse. This first act at Leshy's cabin acts a lot like a roguelike, which is important to remember for much later. This is where the game is the hardest as there's equally a large amount of RNG involved as well as skill. This isn't necessarily a bad thing though, as it never becomes frustrating. Rather, it just encourages you to learn the mechanics of the game closely in order to maximize each run. Leshy here is the true obstacle as well, as you might be facing off against other cards, but he's the one controlling the game and the map that you run through. He both helps and stops you as he plays different characters by using masks. He truly just wants to play the game endlessly rather than have you win or lose. But I'm getting ahead of myself here, as I haven't even talked about the main card gameplay. The actual card gameplay is quite a simple system at first. Built on the scale to your left, if it tips too much to one side, you either win or lose. The main complexity is dealing with multiple cards at once, all with different attributes. You have two stacks of cards to choose from, squirrels and your deck. For most cards, they require you to sacrifice your other cards that are currently in the field in order to play them, but with some requiring multiple sacrifices of blood, it becomes harder to play your cards while staying alive. Bones are another way to get certain cards into play, which are collected from your dead cards, which provide an easy stockpile as long as you have cards that need that form of sacrifice. Another challenge here is deciding what to choose from, the randomness of your deck that might not help you, or the reliable squirrels that do no damage but serve as great sacrifice fodder. Though as you can only draw one card per turn, you'll be more tempted to gamble with choosing the deck. In my opinion, this is both a great part of the game as it makes you think more about each move, but also terrible as it leaves a big part of how you win a fight up to chance. I also briefly mentioned it earlier, but the attributes attached to your cards are a huge part of your deck success, possibly even more so than the standard health and damage. You see, you of course have the standard sigils like flying over cards to hit Leshy directly or moving to another space after your turn ends, but you also have the incredibly useful and game-changing ones like attacking in 3 lanes at once, which can instantly win you the game if the card does at least 2 damage. Another would be the endless cards where they either come back from the dead and back into your hand, or can be infinitely sacrificed to other cards. Of course, there are many more attributes than just those, but that can just give you a scale of what we're working with. Mostly, you'll just have to learn as you go, but the game never feels too punishing when showing off new sigils. Along with that, most attributes, other than a few exceptions, can be explained in a book next to you, which helps a lot in my opinion. These attributes can be naturally binded to your cards from the start, such as all bird cards having the ability to fly, and all shark cards having the ability to swim. Though you can also upgrade your cards at certain rest points, such as this stone in which you can transfer sigils from one card to another at the cost of destroying that original card. Another would be through the use of totems, where for a specific animal group, an attribute is applied to all cards throughout the match. This was super interesting, messing with what kinds of sigils paired well with certain animals. For example, example, you obviously don't want to pair flying with birds, as it doesn't really change anything, though you might want to add that to bugs instead and change a lot. Leshy takes advantage of totems himself, which is quite interesting as it adds more complexity to these encounters, with him being so much more powerful, though you can usually avoid them as they're marked differently on the map. Other than attribute related interactions outside of the battles, there's still a lot of interesting things to find on your path. You of course have places to draw more cards into your deck, whether it be completely random based on cost or on type of animal. You have places to buy backpack items which act as lifelines during battles, to help give you the edge or just keep you alive. The Mycologist is an interesting one, where they stitch together two cards that are the same to combine all parts of them, including health, damage, and attributes. The Trapper and Trader let you buy and exchange pelts for great cards, with currency made from extra hit points that you would have done if not for the scale, though the pelts join your deck so it risks clogging up your battles in between you finding the trader. Campfires were the overall best interactions in my opinion, as you can upgrade a card's health or attack power, though with each time you put it by the fire, there's a chance to lose your card, unless you get rid of the survivors at the campfire by feeding them a ringworm, which is a relatively useless card that you would have no reason to normally put by the campfire. These secret interactions within the normal interactions made the game feel so much more fleshed out, as it kept up that sense of exploration and mystery in the cabin. And speaking about that, I should get to the other main part of the game, the puzzles within the cabin, which starts with your card talking to you.
I mean, there's no chance this thing is actually alive. Well, better safe than sorry.
Wait, no, wait, ah!
The stout card that ends up talking to you helps to direct you to finding two of his friends, and hinting at how to solve various puzzles around the cabin. I obviously won't go over all of them, but I do want to go over the highlights. The stink bug, one of the stout's friends, can be found in a safe which in turn has the code hidden in the attribute book that I mentioned earlier. A giant shelf in the room has 4 sections that simulate a card battle, where if you set it up correctly to where you would win, you gain access to new unique cards and items for your runs. This was awesome as it takes what the player knows and adapts it to a puzzle. I wish the game did more of this, as it helps to blend the two core parts of the game together in a more natural sense, though much later this gets fulfilled. My overall favorite puzzle in the cabin had to be the clock, as you first need to gain access to the knife, which you do so by freeing the caged dog, which you do that by having it take enough hits in battle. Then you have to proceed to cut your own eye out with the knife, which helps you weigh down the scale in your favor, sure, but it also lets you pick out a new eye and a chest, with one being much more unique. This gives you the ability to see hidden text, which shows the right order to put the clock's hands at, and for you to gain the stout's other friend, the stunted wolf, and a way to actually beat Leshy, the film roll. This is probably the best time to mention it. Due to the more roguelike elements of the game, you'll fail many times, with the game actually wanting this to happen as it leads to character events. One of these is Leshy capturing us in a card and combining attributes, health, and damage from various cards throughout a run. On the surface, a neat feature that can result in some really overpowered cards for future runs, but if you could just use the camera against Leshy himself, you could stop the cycle. Though in order to get that chance, you actually have to beat him in a duel first. In order to fight Leshy at his cabin, you have to go through 3 areas with a unique boss for each one. The starting area of the Prospector is obviously the easiest, as it really only serves as a tutorial section, but as you'll have to go through this area multiple times, it quickly feels like more of a time waster. The boss has a pretty cool second phase though, as he gets rid of all cards in play. The second boss is the Angler, and he was pretty average. It isn't that hard to beat him, if you know what you're doing of course, though things can quickly go bad in the first phase due to his hook, or the second as he places sharks in front of all of your cards. The third boss is the best, as it's the Trapper and Trader NPCs we met earlier throughout our run, but they're using their abilities against you. The Trapper has robots and traps, making it harder for you to hit him, and the Trader in the second phase fills the board with cards, but you can steal them for yourself in exchange for your pelts. I felt this boss was perfect, as it used something that the player already has seen, so that means if they were paying attention, they can form a pretty good strategy without even knowing what the second phase would be. All bosses are great in my eyes, and serve each of their own purposes well, but I just wish there were more like the Trapper/Trader fight that used the NPCs we met earlier, like the Woodcarver for example. After all of this, you have a chance for one last interaction before walking up to his cabin, though first you get the chance to earn some boons, which are upgrades for the fight that you can unlock if one of the 3 cards you meet have a certain condition, much like another interaction you can have during your runs. But the difference here is the boons are insanely helpful, like being able to see which cards you're grabbing out of your deck, or drawing twice in one turn. For the actual fight, Leshy decides to make it 3 phases instead of just 2 unlike the past bosses. It's actually the first phase of the fight that's the hardest, as it comes to surviving for as long as possible before you can set up the core of your deck. But as it's just normal enemies, once that happens, you can quickly end the phase. The second phase consists of past player cards, which can easily overwhelm you if you aren't careful, but as your cards from phase 1 weren't destroyed, it's actually quite easy. The final phase, Leshy summons the Moon for help, which isn't surprising as all throughout your runs he doesn't play fair, having access to abilities that the player normally couldn't, but this takes it to a whole nother level. I loved how intimidating it is to see this giant moon card, but it disappoints me just how easy it is to beat it as it only does 1 damage, thus making it feel more like a damage sponge rather than a fulfilling conclusion. Upon beating Leshy, you hear that mysterious voice you heard all the way back at the start again, with it cutting to a camera revealing that we've actually been watching someone else play the game this entire time. This has been Luke Carter, an aspiring card trading YouTuber who, after being sent a pack of Inscription cards, it led him to the game of Inscription that we're playing now. This story, as we play, continues to get deeper and deeper, with Luke uncovering that the company Game Funa is much darker than they seem. He also learns of the past developer Casey Hobbs, who died mysteriously, making Game Funa appear even more suspicious. This detail is important for later, but these videos ended up evolving into an ARG outside of the game as well, which led players to find an actual physical copy of the Inscription floppy disk that Luke found. Of course, people have explained this story in much better detail than I have. However, at the end of the story, an employee ends up shooting Luke right before he was about to expose Game Funa's corruption. I personally love that this side of the story feels more open-ended, while staying connected to the game of course. Speaking about the game, after we end up turning Leshy into a card and access the new game slot that had been missing since the start, loading it up we get met with more of an RPG-like experience, and an intro akin to Undertale. We choose one of 4 Scrybes that we want to replace, and go about beating all Scrybes in order to have a chance at a duel. This adds some replayability to this section in my opinion, as with the small changes to each set of cards, it can feel entirely new. Leshy has what we know and love from Act 1, Grimora expands on the bone mechanic partially shown off before, PO3 uses energy that charges per turn in order to play robots, Magnificus uses magic mox cards in order to play wizards alongside them.
Well, that begins your second turn. Let's just hope you draw something better this time. Unlucky again. Well, I guess this just means I automatically win this turn. What do you mean? I make the rules, okay? This is perfectly fine. Don't blame me just because you suck at the game.
The gameplay in this act is really just a repetitive loop with a few small variations. With each of the 4 main areas where you'll find bosses, you'll first have to solve a puzzle or a small fetch quest. But in order to do that, you first need to defeat 3 smaller enemies that will give you an item or clue that you need to progress through the boss area. It's simple stuff really, but I feel like it works as with a heap of new cards to choose from and gameplay ideas being used, it just works out in the end. Though it's due to the simpleness that the enemies start to feel bland. I love the RPG aesthetic, but without really any risk around losing a fight, it feels more drawn out and bland rather than an actual interesting concept. I briefly mentioned how in this act there are new card types, and just new cards in general, and this in my opinion is this act's greatest change to the game, as it makes the experience feel even more like a deck building card game. You see there are a ton of new cards, within both the new and old types, with some having entirely new attributes as well, but you couldn't get a fraction of these cards using the same old methods in Act 1. So instead the game used trading card packs that you unlock after a battle and from buying from the trader. This helps to reintroduce those Act 1 RNG mechanics without making the game too random for the player. Though as you're bound to get duplicates and just a lot of cards in general, you're actually able to switch out what goes into your deck. This might seem like a small change, but in reality, this makes the game feel vastly different from Act 1, as you never wanted to overcrowd your cards there, while in this act, you can spend more time finding out your perfect strategy. The bosses in this act are pretty good, but not amazing, as they're still built upon the basic enemy encounters, just with a new twist. Leshy is pretty simple, taking from the Deathcard mechanic from Act 1, in order to build up a powerful card to fight his second phase for you. Grimoire is another easygoing fight, as all she does is recycle all destroyed cards and give them back to you as zombies in order to fight her second phase. Magnificus is one of the more interesting fights, as they use their paintbrush to add new sigils to the cards, in order to make both your cards and their cards more powerful. PO3 is the best boss here in my opinion, as his gimmick is an actual puzzle to get used to while battling. You see, he uses conveyor belts to constantly be cycling the cards around the playing field. This makes you think as a powerful card you might have played could be turned against you just like that, if not killed or sacrificed soon after being played. I wish the other bosses did this, kind of a puzzle-like layout, rather than being just basic additions to normal fights. Before I move on to the final boss in this act, I want to take a second to talk about the many problems here. This act of the game is just bland and boring. Of course it has some interesting ideas, it never has them be fully realized. This part of the game just felt more like something to fill the time than to bring up cool new concepts for the player. I wish it went further with the RPG aesthetic, perhaps making it feel like a mini Pokemon game. The deck building could have been an even bigger feature, but instead it feels like something you can just ignore and throw to the wayside and still be completely fine. I get that it isn't supposed to be what the game is entirely like, but I wish they did something more, rather than this act feeling like a test project for some future game. When you go to fight the final boss, it depends on who you chose to duel at the start of the act, but either way, PO3 interrupts you in order to take over the game and make himself in control, much like what Leshy did in Act 1. This transitions us back into another 3D space at PO3's factory. This act of the game merges both the previous act's ideas, as it's more of an RPG-like experience, but with closer card gameplay and expansion to Act 1. You have to find save beacons across the board, but on your way you'll encounter fights. The difficulty comes when you lose a fight, as you'll be sent all the way back to the last save beacon, and you have to fight those enemies all over again. This of course sounds like a normal game, but when compared to the gameplay in previous acts, this change seems so much bigger than it actually is. You'll have to explore the board and take on 4 bosses in each corner in order to face the final boss, much like how Act 2 progressed.
I deal my ultra rare Charizard in attack mode, and that deals 5 damage. What? Hey, that isn't a standard issued card. Stop cheating. Jeez, it feels like you change the rules every single turn.
The card gameplay here is a huge expansion to the energy cards introduced in Act 2. Like last time, the energy recharges each turn, as well as going up by 1, with you having that available energy to spend on cards. Pretty simple, as it takes away the use of squirrel sacrifices, while still keeping that idea of choosing what to pick. This time it becomes more about surviving for as long as possible before you have enough energy to play with the major cards. Though this act also expands on the Magic Mox cards, though it doesn't do a lot of new things when compared to the energy cards. Another change in this act is that the playing field is now 5 spaces instead of just 4, which seems small at first, but can help influence the way you play greatly. But other than that, it also just helps to keep the core gameplay fresh, as the past 2 acts would feel too similar to this one if it kept the 4-lane structure. The game also introduces 2 new forms of encounters here. The first is your bounty. You see, the more enemies you defeat without dying yourself, your bounty raises, with there being a chance to encounter powerful bounty hunters on your way. These interactions are quite fun to find, and it keeps the difficulty present while playing so that you don't just breeze through the whole game. In reward, you get more money than you usually would. This money can then be used to upgrade your cards and gain extra items. The other interactions are the timed bombs, where the player has to defeat PO3 quickly, as after every turn, the bomb ticks down. Upon it going off, you obviously automatically lose that fight. I like this as it matches quite well with the energy mechanics, as you have to struggle to do damage to the bomb until your energy levels get high enough to do actual damage. Other than these, the card upgrade interactions are pretty run-of-the-mill. The puzzles in this act felt more reminiscent of the past 2 act puzzles as well. The core ones would be these energy battery puzzles in which you have to add them up to get the correct output, though this was already seen in PO3's area in Act 2. A lot of the puzzles have you interact with the map, such as the solution to the clock having to be bought at the store, or with these hidden pelts scattered across the map in secret areas, which you can then trade to the trader in return for some bits of lore. But my favorite obstacle in this act had to be the totem, which requires you searching around the factory for 3 different sigils, which when put together gives you a nice moment with the green ooze character who has been present all throughout the game. Moving on to the bosses, they all have some really cool and unique mechanics, with some even using your actual computer. The photographer uses a camera to let you save what the playing field looks like, in order to get yourself out of certain situations. This is a super cool idea with you in a sense reversing time, but I wish the photographer used the camera themselves, as that would be a cool concept to battle over what version of the board is in play. The Archivist was my favorite overall boss this act, as it uses things from your actual PC hard drive. What I mean is the boss routinely asks to search your files for one taking up a lot of space, which when chosen helps to weigh down the scale in your favor. The second phase is where things get really interesting, as the Archivist asks for a file that's really old. This file becomes a card in-game, with the boss saying that they'll delete the file if the card is destroyed. Don't worry though, as this can't actually happen. If you choose a photo file, it displays it on the boss's head. A music file plays the track in the background, etc. This kind of interactivity took me by surprise at first, but it was super cool to see my photo in the game. The Painter is another really cool concept for a fight, as you actually make the boss yourself. You design what they look like and the conditions of the fight. This essentially means you can make the boss as easy or as hard as you want, with certain conditions involving cards being destroyed, bombs being placed, you taking damage, etc. I thought this was really cool, though I wish the second phase was something more unique rather than just a repeat of the first phase. Golly was another great boss, as the enemy cards they use are actual people from your Steam friend list. This was something cool to experience for the first time, as it's not something I expected at all. The second phase involves you making a card for another player to win their first phase with. This might take a while as it's someone else playing, though I don't know if it's possible to actually lose this phase. Either way, it's quite cool for it to connect to other players' games and your online friends, in order to add a bit more fourth wall breaking aspects to this game. The final boss actually starts with you checking out a broken camera within the factory. Here you meet the other 3 Scrybes again. They tell you to keep PO3 busy, but when you head back, PO3 reveals that he wants to spread Inscription across the internet. And now that you gave him access to your computer through each of the bosses you beat in Act 3, he can. Leshy reappears to kill PO3, starting a quite somber moment as Gromora starts up a deletion process for the Inscription files. You go from boss to boss, playing them until the game eventually deletes them too, just after you shake their hand. I thought it was quite sad, as even though the scale disappears, Leshy asks to keep playing, which made me think back to Act 1 in the cabin. Eventually, after all Scrybes are deleted, you talk to the Woodcarver, who releases the old data tying back to the ARG parts of the game that I mentioned before.
Okay. Let's just go back to the basics, and I'll disregard you cheating all the time if we just go back to how we had it at the beginning, okay? Now isn't this nice? It's just like how we had it before, just with a few small changes.
Apart from the core game, we have Casey's mod, which takes Act 1 and turns it into a full-on roguelike. I mentioned it earlier, but this works really well as Act 1 felt like a mini roguelike already, so it just adapts greatly. A few things obviously change, with some features limiting you now more, like the campfire only having 2 upgrades at a time, as opposed to the 8 that it was. The order of the maps is also random, meaning you can fight the trapper/trader first and the prospector last, but the overall experience feels the same, other than the new modifiers and starting decks. The modifiers limit you by taking away certain upgrades or abilities while making Leshy stronger, with totems in all fights, giving him better cards, etc. If you complete a run with these modifiers on, you unlock newer modifiers and decks, as well as lore entries to read. The decks, as you expect, really only change your starting cards, though this can make a huge difference. This extra mode easily adds another 20 hours onto the total playtime, and gives the game a lot of replayability. Inscription is a pretty great game, and so far one of my favorite indie gaming experiences, though it isn't without its share of problems. Each of the 3 acts feel dragged out and like they're missing their full potential at the same time. The replayability of the game doesn't feel extremely wanted, other than Casey's mod, though this kind of game doesn't need major replayability. I go back and forth with these aspects of the game, but the thing is, the game's fun. I had a great time with my playthrough and would easily recommend it to anyone, even if you aren't a fan of card-based games, much like how I'm not. I'm excited to see where Daniel Mullins goes next, though I doubt it will be a sequel as the game doesn't really need one, despite a few aspects still being open to explore. Overall, the game deserves the praise that it gets, and it's extremely fun.
And for my final move, Mom, I'm playing with my friends. Turn the lights back off.